We're going to start. Welcome on this session on drug policies. There are about more than 20 European countries, and they all have different policies when it comes to drugs. Drug treatments are different, drug policies are different, and why. Also, everybody has an opinion on drugs when it comes to this subject, and we all differ from opinion as well. Also, the field of drugs and drug policies is a field of misinformation, disinformation, and myth. So I thought it would be a good idea to organize a session on drug policies. I've invited two speakers from an organization called Drug Science. Drug Science is based in the UK. It's an independent organization. They are free from political influence, and they present the science that there is out there on drugs. So I would like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Katrin Schlag. She is the head of research of drug science, and she's going to tell us what are the most dangerous drugs that are out there.
Thank you, Katrin, and thank you to the European Skeptics for inviting us. Hopefully we'll make that an interesting kind of drug sciencey afternoon. My colleague David Badcock is going to speak a little bit more about drug science itself and why we exist. So I'm going to speak, yes, in the program I think it's still kind of the old title, the most dangerous substances, which I'm going to come to as well. But really overall the presentation is drugs without the hot air, from misinformation to science, or in light of the conference theme, really from perceived risk to real risk, question mark. What I'm going to speak about, my outline is really, right, starting a bit with the misinformation. So drugs are illegal, so they must be dangerous, right? But moving on from there really, and I can see already some laughter here, to the actual science. You know, what are the real dangers? How do we investigate drug harms? Can we investigate drug harms? Moving on to one way to investigate drug harms, which is our multi-criteria decision analysis, or MCDAs, to avoid this mouthful, developed by Professor Larry Phillips at the London School of Economics. And then I'll also move on to compare drug harms to other risks, if we want to take that perspective in terms of danger, and really concluding with questions, should we ban drugs, or which drugs should we ban, if so, and moving on to what other options do we have, which hopefully leads in well with the presentation of my colleague David Badcock. If we can have the video briefly, please.
Gentlemen, come on, Dr. Jaffe, Mr. Krogh, Mr. Ehrlich. Fine. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize for you the meeting that I have just had with the bipartisan leaders, which began at 8 o'clock and was completed 2 hours later. I began the meeting by making this statement, which I think needs to be made to the nation. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I have asked the Congress to provide the legislative authority and the funds to fuel this kind of an offensive. This will be a worldwide offensive dealing with the problems of sources of supply as well as Americans who may be stationed abroad, wherever they are in the world. It will be government.
So you probably will recognize this is Nixon in 1971 declaring the new offenses, declaring the war on drugs, which is still going on today, more than 50 years later. So most of you will know that this war on drugs, if so, has led to untold suffering and damage within populations globally, nationally, internationally, which I'm not going to go into at the moment. However, it also led to the creation and development of various regulations and conventions on drugs. I'll sum up very briefly the ones which are kind of key to the presentation here. The United Nations Conventions of Drugs, I'll get through the scheduling in a minute, has a one-size-fits-all arrangement focusing on a rigid prohibitionist approach to drugs that every country in the world is expected to adopt. The aim really is to prohibit drug use, as we all know, as well as, of course, supply, while still allowing the medical research of these substances, which leads us to a different project problem as well. So some parts of the UN treaties are clearly outdated now. They are no longer fit for purpose, if they ever were, to deal with the new challenges, and they do not really reflect the reality of today's world, as well as of the harms of drugs, I'll argue. Then, of course, we have UK regulations, US regulation, and various other countries' regulations. As Katrin already highlighted, all countries do it slightly differently, but really many have a strongly prohibitionist perspective so far. They're similar that they are based on repression, that they criminalize at least certain drug use and drug users, and they impose serious penalties, up to life in prison for some cases, and in up to 30 countries globally still a death penalty for drug offenses. So the current scheduling, just to give you a very brief overview, we've got here, you can see the UN conventions versus the UK misuse of drugs and the US Controlled Substances Act. You can see that whilst they are using different numericals and so on, the scheduling is quite similar. I think what I do want to highlight here as well, within Schedule 1 we have cocaine, heroin, strongly addictive substances, but likewise we have the psychedelics or psychedelic drugs, the DMT, dimethyltryptamine, LSD, MDMA, and psilocybin, also known as magic mushroom. So it's quite clear that there's quite a discrepancy between these drugs. I mean, these drugs are probably not comparable in the way it is done here. So we're working very much to, develop this and change this. And you will see after also that this scheduling obviously have a huge impact on what's happening both with the drug users, as we can see here, an example of the penalties. This is in relation to the UK Misuse of Drugs Act created in 1971. A penalty for possession of a Class A drug, which includes, for example, MDMA or LSD, is 7 years, while supply actually might lead to a life imprisonment. And supply in this way does not necessarily have to be kilos upon kilos or tons of this substance, but can also be a few dozens which recreational user might choose to have for the weekend. So, moving on to Class B drugs, obviously is slightly less, but you can see especially for Class C drugs you can see very strong kind of penalties, especially for supply. So getting the class wrong obviously has very profound consequences, particularly for users caught in possession. Criminal record really scares life, damages life's chances, and so on. So illegal drugs must be dangerous, right? If they are scheduled like this, surely they're dangerous. The perception of the drugs are dangerous, these kind of narratives, would suggest that the risk of these drugs, especially the ones that we have seen in Schedule 1, is very high. Whilst unscheduled drugs, just as an example, alcohol, must be quite safe then, correct? This is obviously far from the truth. Yeah? It wasn't always like that either. So cannabis, for example, has been a medicine until the 1970s anyway. Psychedelics were studied widely in the 1940s and 50s up to the 1960s, really, with thousands of participants in research and very few serious adverse effects, thankfully, as well. So the drugs themselves didn't change, but it seems public perception of them did. The war on drugs narrative started by Nixon. And I just should say that I appreciate that just blaming everything on Nixon is a bit of a simplification. There were loads of other social and societal factors that played a role as well. So I wanted to just go back briefly, if I have time, to the conference theme of kind of risk of uncertainty, which is also an area that I've been involved in previously. Perceived risk versus real risk, where we think it's a scientist. And just to give you a broad outline, don't know how many are familiar with this Slovak psychometric paradigm. Probably most of you, I can see nodding in the audience. You can see where Slovak, I'm not going to go into it, but where Slovak basically analyzed various risks on the dimensions of dreadfulness as well as unfamiliarity versus familiarity. And you can see how do I manage this, that we have alcohol, tobacco, and alcohol accidents here in that kind of corner, which is associated with low dread and a familiar risk. Familiar risk, yes, granted, these risks are familiar to all of us. However, low dread, I think I'm going to show you some things which are quite dreadful in relation to alcohol and tobacco as well. And I've always thought in this is obviously a 2002 revised version of Slovik's paradigm. You can see, if I can move it perfectly, also kind of the handguns as a familiar risk, which kind of sadly shows us the American perspective of the psychometric paradigm at that time. So moving on to the health harms of legal versus illegal drugs. If you really think the scheduling is correct, and I'm going to show you basically now a slide from the World Drugs Report in 2022, just out recently, which really highlights, just check here, the substance use related deaths in 2019, and this, please note, is in million. And you can see very clearly that tobacco comes far, far top of the list at 8.7 million related deaths, followed by alcohol use as a risk factor, 2.4 million, and then actually drug use, basically illegal drug use, at a relatively small 500,000 deaths in 2019. Obviously, that's not to belittle any of those deaths and so on, but really, let's, to be realistic and to base things scheduling on science, drug use accounts for 5% of all substance-related deaths. So it's actually a fairly low percentage. And again, if we want to look at the years of healthy life lost due to disability and premature death, again, tobacco is by far the most riskiest or the most unhealthy substance here, followed by alcohol and followed by the illicit substances. When we look at drug-related deaths in the UK, do bear in mind that this is a log scale, 90,000 versus the 1,400 on this side. Again, we have alcohol as the top death-causing substance here, tobacco, followed by alcohol, and the opioids afterwards and so on. But then, when you look at it and compare it possibly to, for example, paracetamol as well and cocaine, you can see really the effects of the drugs there. And then we have, which are also equally scheduled as Scheduled 1, ecstasy, MDMA, as I mentioned, with a very, very low number of deaths. I think we have about 50 a year. Every death is too much. Every death is preventable. Not every, but most are preventable. So again, not to diminish it, but just to give a perspective of what's actually happening when we talk about the harms of drugs. Comparing this to other preventable deaths, here again we have alcohol, tobacco on top, opiates, of course, following, in relation to melanoma, skin cancer, kidney disease, and sadly also suicide. So you can really see the risks and the preventable risks and where we maybe as a society also want to put more resources. Moving on to tobacco and health. So tobacco kills up to 1 in every 2 users. This is a huge number. And of the more than 1 billion smokers alive today, around 500 million will actually be killed by tobacco. So why is tobacco not illegal? Looking at tobacco in relation to premature deaths, you can see that tobacco is a risk factor for 6 of the 8 leading causes of death in the world, and these include at the top, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, respiratory infection, lung disease, and so on. So tobacco use is a key risk, unfortunately, implemented in all these other risks. I don't know who remembers of you Amy Winehouse, the singer, who sadly died due to acute alcohol poisoning. She was very popular, at least in the UK, as well as globally, I think, and widely presented as an addict, as somebody addicted to drugs, alcohol, and so on, which, she may have been. She, at the time of her death, however, it was estimated that she actually had been in recovery for over a month. However, she drank, she consumed alcohol, had a very high blood alcohol level in her blood at the time of her death, 5 times 5, the legal drinking limit in the UK. And really the question here is, she was in recovery, and she might have well died because she was in recovery, because her body was not used to the amount of alcohol that she had been previously consuming. Again, media did not make very much of it. I think if it was illicit drug death, probably they would have made more of it. So moving on to men, I think that's also a key factor. This is here within Europe. The alcohol is the most common reason for death in men under 50. I did find this really interesting. You can see kind of the sliding scale, and then obviously from very young people to the older and the mature people, where it is implicated in many less deaths. But it's really quite shocking to see that 20% of male deaths under 50 years are actually due to alcohol. Again, alcohol, the main cause of global disability in 15 to 24-year-olds. Illicit drug use causes far less. Again, I'm not saying that illicit drug use is good or anything, but just if you want to look at the science and if you want to make a realistic, a scientific comparison, I think this is quite helpful. Looking here at Europe here in the middle, you can see the green bar is alcohol, whether the blue bar here is illicit drug use, combining all the illicit substances. I mean, alcohol far outweighs any of them in terms of the global burden of disease. Yeah, this was a very large-scale Lancet study. So moving on to, I think many of you might have heard about the benefits of alcohol. A glass of wine is actually really good for you, and it's really healthy to drink sometimes. But unfortunately, this isn't quite the case. The alcohol lobby might well have quite a role to play in this kind of narrative. So the optimal dose of alcohol for health benefits, if one wants to put it, would literally be half a unit. So, a teeny glass of wine or half a pint of beer. Half a pint, I guess it's 200 milligrams. So, and you can see again, I think the chart outlines it quite nicely. The blue bar is the percentage of male deaths attributed to alcohol consumption by age. These are the caused, the male deaths, and then the tiny green bar on the side actually shows the number of deaths prevented through alcohol consumption. And as you can see, it's very, very small, so might not be worth drinking, basically. So what's going on? Why are some drugs controlled but not others? They're harmful, but so are alcohol and tobacco, as we've seen very clearly now. Yeah? They might be harmful. Is it an unknown risk? I'm not really sure. I mean, we have done the research since quite a while as well. Sociocultural contexts matter. That's obviously clear because things were very different pre-Nixon and pre the war on drugs narrative. The media wants it, and as you probably saw yesterday already, the media does influence public risk perceptions to an extent. As to the majority of politicians, they wanted some of the public, and unfortunately also the international community. This includes the WHO and the United Nations, who haven't changed their drug scheduling for a very long time. So getting the best estimate of drug harms is vital, clearly, but it's clearly difficult. So there's still quite poor data on existing control drugs because of the illegality, because of their scheduling. Most use is covert. Some people might not, so it's quite difficult to really estimate who's taking what as well. We don't know what exact substance it is as well. What is sold as ecstasy might not even contain MDMA these days, and so on. And even less easy for new entrants to the field, the legal heights, the new psychoactive substances, because we very often don't even know what they are until we actually see any kind of outcome. So if you see possibly a death or injury, so quite a challenge. So how can we investigate real drug harms? There are different options, we say. So we can do the relative harms of drugs, comparison with alcohol and tobacco, which I've showed you just now, I think. We can compare drugs to other risky activities, which I look into briefly after. We can look at the proportionality of penalties in relation to the health harms, possibly. And we can do the fourth option, which is really also benefits versus harms. So, but all of these approaches obviously are quite challenging. It's not easy to investigate the real harms of drugs. So what we've done at Drug Science, developed or used multi-criteria decision analysis, MCDA in short. So this is quite a complex approach, which I'm going to elucidate quickly, because I know we don't have too much time. The first one, this is still available online, by the way, in the Lancet Drug Harms in the UK, a multi-criteria decision analysis, one of the most cited Lancet articles, apparently, led by Professor David Badcock with Leslie King and Larry Phillips, our colleague. And they developed an MCDA model to test its potential for evaluating drug harms. So MCDAs, in a nutshell, for those of you who don't know, many of you will be familiar with decision analysis, I suppose. So it's something a little bit similar but different, as Larry Phillips would say. So it's really a lengthy and thorough process in which a group of experts, and these, in the case of drug harms, these would include chemists and toxicologists, criminologists, physicians, and so on. A group of experts assess the relative harms, which is the top 20 drugs, which I'll show after. The aim is really to differentiate between the most and least harmful drugs, to answer the question, so which drugs are the most harmful? So the group collectively discusses and scores the drugs on 16 harms, so not just the deaths and the toxicology and so on, both to the users and importantly also to society. So these drugs are scored out of 100 points, and the criteria are weighted to indicate their relative importance. So that's quite important. It's relative, the harms relative and compared to other harms as well. Sensitivity analyses are conducted to reduce any bias and uncertainty, because it's quite a complex procedure, quite fun as well. And before I show you the results, actually I wanted to highlight that these results have been replicated now internationally and over time, providing quite a good degree actually of validity. So the 16 ways drugs can harm. So in the harms or to users, I'm not going to go through all of them. Most of them I expect are self-explanatory. Harms to users include all the drug-specific mortality and so on, but then dependence, for example, as well, but equally something like loss of tangibles and loss of relationships. Yeah. Harms to others and harms to society include, of course, also injury and crime, economic costs, impact to family life, international damage, environmental damage possibly, and a decline in the reputation of the community. So all these harms are assessed for each drug. To give a couple of outlines here, the drug-specific mortality, I don't know if you have any toxicologists here in the audience, but you can see basically the index of toxicity is the deaths per millions of users. So this is quite a factual number you can see, and as one would expect, I think heroin, 1 in up to 50 heroin users die of the drug. So it's quite a high toxicity index as well, but then when you look at cannabis, it's extremely low. I hope that makes sense. Drug-related harms, sadly, I think we're all familiar with that. Just taking heroin as an example here as well, because obviously it is associated with a broad range of harms as well, AIDS being one, hepatitis B and C, skin infections, anthrax infections, etc., etc. So quite a lot of associated harms. Drug-related mortality, and going here back to tobacco and lung disease and alcohol liver disease, I think that's also quite self-explanatory, but just highlighting the differences between the toxicology and the mortality in that. So the 20 drugs we analyzed, you can see them here. Most of them, I presume, are familiar with you. So of all different categories, and of course, importantly, also including alcohol and tobacco. Yeah, we did not just stick to the illegal substances and so on. We thought it was absolutely vital to actually include alcohol and tobacco too. So these are the drugs ranked according to the total harm as assessed by our expert groups in 2010. As I said, this has been replicated internationally with different expert groups as well. So again, you can see that alcohol scores the top mark on the overall harms. And here, the blue scale, the blue part of the bar, you can see this is the harms of users, which I indicated before. But alcohol, sadly, also scores terribly high on the harms of others, the harms of society, economic damage, and so on. Yeah. And then this is followed by heroin, crack cocaine, as we could imagine as well. And then tobacco, again, scores fairly high. So, and then if you look at the substances which score rather low, these are, again, the ecstasy, LSD, mushrooms, this is psilocybin, and so on. So loads of the psychedelic drugs. Because most of them, they don't seem to have any harms to the others, at least, you know, and as well as to the users, according to the experts here. So again, we ranked here the harms to others versus harms to users, and you can see quite clearly that alcohol comes out on top just because of the harms to the others. You know, alcohol is dangerous, is damaging to our society. Moving on to just very quickly to show the correlations, going back to the scheduling of the drugs, there was very little correlation between the scheduling of particular drugs and the UK Drugs Acts in relation to these results. So these are the UK drug classification, A, B, C, and U is for unscheduled. And these are our results, the overall harm score. And again, really alcohol and tobacco, unclassified or unscheduled, so to say, under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, scored nevertheless very high on their overall harms. So what are the implications? So one of them is the key. The UK Misuse of Drugs Act is fundamentally incorrect in many of its drug rankings, and really the law is unjust, just punishing. The United Nations international conventions are likely similarly wrong. Alcohol really should be the major target for harm reduction and to protect users and society. And lastly, also important, which I alluded to earlier, the current regulations also restrict vital research, because many banned drugs have the potential as treatment. Many of you will be familiar with it, and I'll get to that in a minute. So this is just in relation to LSD and psilocybin, how the UN conventions destroyed research. This graph shows the impact of the 1971 United Nations Convention on Psychedelic Research. You can see the amount of research, the number of publications, both on LSD especially, as well as psilocybin, were very high, always in the hundreds. However, this declined absolutely steadily until there was hardly any left in the 1990s. So really, really sad state of affair, really missed about 20 years of progress in a way, until they really started to increase again from about 2010 onwards. So that's another very exciting point. So, but because many banned drugs have the potential as treatment, I think cannabis, medical cannabis, most of us will be familiar here, and the increasing numbers of countries are legalizing cannabis for medical use now, has been shown to have a positive impact on patients' pain, sleep, spasticity in relation to multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, cancer, nausea and vomiting, for example, post-traumatic stress disorders, and so on and so on. We're still doing the research because we don't know, but there's absolutely, we're certain, cannabis can be used for very positive impacts for patients. MDMA, ecstasy, moving on to the psychedelics, has recently been shown to really help with post-traumatic stress disorders. There are very exciting studies going on in relation to PTSD in veterans, for example, Parkinson's disease, alcohol use disorder, a study just out recently. So loads of research that needs to be done, and that's why I put ... as well, just to show we just don't know yet. But it's a very exciting time to do the research, if we can. Psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushroom, has been studied in relation very successfully so far on depression, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorders, cluster headaches, end-of-life anxiety for cancer patients, and so on. LSD as well, the kind of problem child, so to say, has shown very positive impact in relation to anxiety, in relation to terminal illness, addiction, as well as most recently pain and chronic pain disorders. DMT, dimethyltryptamine, also drunk as ayahuasca, the tea, has been shown to be very helpful in relation to depression. Again, these are quite small studies. We can't, but we need much more research. However, the positive effects are clear so far, even within these small studies. And also, I think very importantly, the lack of serious adverse effects. in these studies. So that's very important so far. So really, I've kind of shown that, the drug harms is quite a complex issue, but the scheduling that we have in the UK, US, as well as international, is severely problematic. Another way would be, for example, to compare drug harms to other risks, right? Because there are lots of risky activities many of us are doing regularly, choose to do, such as bungee jumping, motorcycle racing, or also climbing, here being in Austria. I thought it was fitting. So, these are all risks, and unfortunately, these activities do lead to death in some instances. However, we're not banning these activities. We have guidelines, I suppose, for kind of safe use in some cases, but it's not, none of these activities are banned. And I should also say, most people choose not to do these activities. They're legal, but most people do not choose to do that. And some people do choose to take the risk. For them, the risk is worth it. So another, I think that was quite an interesting New Scientist editorial from over 10 years ago now, Peanuts or Ecstasy. The editorial was entitled, "Drugs Drive Politicians Out of Their Minds." As many of you know, this is kind of, titles and thematics journalists like to use in terms of drugs are quite similar. So right, imagine you are seated at a table with two bowls in front of you. One contains peanuts, the other tablets of the illegal recreational drug MDMA, ecstasy. A stranger joins you and you have to decide whether to give them a peanut or a pill. So which is safest?
The MDMA.
Okay, I can see I have a very educated group here, yes. You should give them ecstasy, of course. A much larger percentage of people suffer a fatal acute reaction to peanuts than to MDMA. Absolutely correct. Thank you, guys. So horse riding, another thing, I think we are kind of living in the UK. This is a big topic as well. So horse riding, a very popular activity, very traditional activity. Sadly, it does lead to death. It can lead to brain damage and can lead to paralysis. These are all recognized risks. And I personally know people who sit in a wheelchair because they fell off a horse. But that's a risk they chose to take, plus lots of other minor injuries. So the risk of serious injury from horse riding is actually much higher than from consuming ecstasy. So that's, and our wonderful boss, Professor David Badcock, has written a paper about it, also available online, entitled Equeasy, an overlooked addiction with implications for the current debate on drug harms. So tongue-in-cheek, but quite important nevertheless, to really actually give a perspective, what is it doing? Why are we doing this with drugs and not with other activities? So to conclude, really, I hope I have shown you that there really is a lot of hot air around illegal drugs. Their risks are overrepresented in the media and in the public perception by and large. The real risks of drugs are really not in line with their current scheduling, and we need to improve on that. The drug laws have not stopped the use or the supply, as most of you will know. They only hampered vital research for quite a considerable time. So in the war on drugs, the drugs won. We have spent billions, and of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, untold harm and suffering, but really we have got nowhere since over 50 years. So rather than, and this was actually, I thought that was quite interesting quote from the European Parliament over 20 years ago already. Rather than protecting society and allowing vital research, the policy of prohibiting drugs is the true cause of the increasing damage that the production of, trafficking in, and sale and use of illegal substances are inflicting on whole sectors of society, on the economy, on our public institution, eroding the health, freedom, and life of individuals. And the reason I include this is 20 years ago. I think we need to move forward now. So where do we go from here? My colleague David Badcock will speak more about this really. What policy and regulatory responses do we have? And we're seeing quite a lot of changes within Europe and the US and Canada at the moment. So very exciting and hopefully positive things are happening. Harm reduction is an approach, decriminalization, legalization question mark, and this is actually the reason I have the question mark is there basically when we mention that when we give talks, so about legalize, if you legalize drugs, everybody will take this, and one of our colleagues always says, yeah, but golf is legal, only 5% of people play golf. And it's not going to change what you're saying. So increasingly complex, really, our way forward, especially in light of the regulatory changes in Europe. Just as an example, at the moment, Germany, as many of you will know, are going through huge changes in relation to cannabis regulation, and everybody is really looking towards Germany, big Germany, doing this within Europe. So quite exciting, and again, as I said, hopefully positive. And the work of drug science, really, as well as many other organizations, national and international, is really to deal with drugs without the hot air and hopefully give the real perspective and the scientific assessment of the drugs. So I want to say just a quick, huge thank you to my boss, Professor David Nutt, for really telling the truth about drugs at considerable professional as well as personal expense in some ways. You know, he's been called the dangerous professor just for saying the truth about drugs. And if you're interested in, big thank you obviously from me, but here's further suggested reading about Drink, the New Science of Alcohol, as well cannabis, Science of Cannabis and Health, Drugs Without the Hot Air, and if you're interested in Professor David Nutt's autobiography too. And I should say these books, I mean, we all contributed to them as well, are written really, you know, they have the latest science, but they're very accessible to an audience, a lay audience as well, and they're available on our webpage. So thank you very much, and I think we're doing questions after both sessions.
Yes. Thank you very much. I think you gave us a lot of information we can think about. We are going to leave the questions till later. We're first going to have the second presentation. Thank you very much for this so far. So the next speaker is Dr. David Badcock. He is the CEO of Drug Science, the same organization, and he is going to discuss what would we say if we could advise European politicians. David Badcock, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Katrin, for your introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today. And my presentation is going to really follow on from my colleague Anna's excellent presentation. So she's been talking to you about the scientific facts around drugs and how harmful are they actually, and how should we be comparing one against the other. And I want to build on that a little bit by talking about drug policy, how different governments, different jurisdictions around the world either look at that evidence and use it, to inform drug policy, or in the case of the majority of governments, how they're completely ignoring it, completely ignoring the evidence and continuing with this this kind of very ineffective war on drugs as we know it. So firstly, just a little bit more about drug science. As Anna mentioned, we're a UK-based charity set up 12 years ago, I think it was, by Professor David Nutt. David, for those of you who don't know David, he used to be the chief advisor to the government on drugs until he started to tell the truth about drugs. And the truth was not what the government wanted to hear. He produced that paper that Anna showed on the screen there, comparing horse riding to MDMA, and came out with this kind of famous quote, really saying that, well, actually, horse riding is more dangerous than taking ecstasy. The UK government just couldn't handle that. They couldn't cope with that, so they sacked him. Really, I think that was maybe one of the best things that the government did, because since then, David has been really leading the charge in highlighting the inadequacies of the drug policy in the UK and around the world. And he set up drug science to be able to challenge this, to highlight where things have gone wrong and how we should be doing things better. And that's the reason that drug science exists, and that's the reason we are here day after day trying to kind of make people understand really the difference between good and bad drug policy. You can see our vision and mission there. So just a bit more about the war on drugs. Anna's introduced this. Since 50 years, this is what we've done really. So apparently we spent over $1 trillion tackling this war. It's claimed over 300,000 lives. Now that's the lives of people who have been involved in the drug supply chain and people who have been killed. And so we're not talking about people who have been killed by the harms of drugs, and that may be much more. This is people who are involved in the drug trade. It's obviously destabilized many countries, especially those developing countries where drugs are produced, Mexico, Colombia, Afghanistan, places where drug cartels really are in charge, not the government. And this has destabilized these countries and is a very perverse way for countries to be developing. And kind of the most depressing thing about all of it is it's had negligible impacts on use. So this prohibition method has not deterred people from taking drugs. And as Anna highlighted, people will take drugs. More people won't take drugs because it's illegal, but it won't be the case that less people take drugs because it's illegal. So there's very negligible impacts on any kind of use. If you just look at the UK, so I'm from the UK, obviously, so if we look at the UK specifically, we've criminalised 40,000 people for the possession of drugs. Many of those people will be young, often black males, but a lot of young people caught in possession of drugs like cannabis, which really don't cause any great deal of harm if it's not used in a dependent kind of a way. But they've been given criminalised records, which then goes on to kind of affect their lives in many more ways. The criminal record, kind of destroys their life chances far more than the use of cannabis or other illicit drugs. As I said, it disproportionately attacks black people and young people. It's a racist drug policy, and if you're a young black male, you are far more likely to be to be intervened by the police, whether you've got drugs on you or not. You're far more likely to be stopped and searched than if you're not in that cohort. And again, as before, this has not had any good impact. Essentially, we've seen in the UK over a number of years a year-on-year increase in drug-related deaths. Every year we have more people who are dying from drugs. In fact, Scotland, which is obviously one of the countries in our union, has by far and away the highest level of drug-related deaths across the whole of Europe. It's hugely more than any other parts of Europe. And this is a national disgrace. It's something that we need to address, but we are simply not doing so at the moment. So Anna showed you the little clip of Robert Nixon. He was the one who really kind of ignited the war on drugs. The war on drugs actually goes back a bit further. It goes back into probably about 100 years or so, where various kind of policies and laws started to attack people who use drugs. But Nixon really kind of brought it to the forefront. He said here, as you saw in that clip, America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it's necessary to wage a new, all-out offensive. Now, I won't go into a great amount of detail about why he chose to do this, but essentially it wasn't really about tackling drug use. It was really about targeting black people and demonizing them, particularly things like using cannabis or marijuana, as they like to call it. They liked to call it back then. It was really about that, and also about the anti-war left, who were rising up in great numbers around the Vietnam War, and often associating, there's the famous quote, I can't remember what it was now, don't go to war, use acid. I've forgotten the, don't drop bombs, drop acid, that's right. No, thank you, Anna, yeah. And so really, the war on drugs was really trying to target these uprisings that he really wanted to try and quash. But this campaign, if you like, has been remarkably effective. And as I said, as Anna said as well, it's led the world in the way that drug policy has been formed since then. And the UN conventions have really dictated to the world how we should treat drugs, and it's not been successful at all. It didn't stop with Nixon. It kind of continued with successive governments. This is Nancy Reagan. So during the Reagan administration, one of the major campaigns that she started was this "Just Say No" message on drugs. The kind of the basis of this is that you should just say no to taking drugs, and kind of what that means is if you don't just say no, you're weak. You're a bad person. You've no moral compass, because you should just say no, right? That's all you need to do. Just say no. It's simple. This quote, I like this quote because actually what she's saying is understanding what your drugs can do to your children, understanding peer pressure, and understanding why they turn to drugs is the first step to solving the problem. Now, she was absolutely right there, but the trouble is she didn't understand any of those things, and the government didn't understand, why people do take drugs. Why do they have dependency issues? Why do they feel that's what they want to do against other kind of activities? So she didn't take her own advice here, but all she was saying was just say no, and that's all you need to do. It is no surprise that this campaign has not worked in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. But the media also jumped on this bandwagon, and we have this constant fight with the media, and still do today. They like to sensationalize, they like to target people who take drugs, and they come out with the most insane stories and headlines. Now, these are obviously quite old. They go back some time, and I don't think any even half respectable publication would attempt to publish stories like this, but they did back in the day. LSD feb ape rapes TV actress. Girl gives birth to a frog, and doctors blame LSD. This is insanity. This is just ridiculous hype stories, all trying to kind of make people believe that you take a drug and you will instantly change into this terrible, evil person, and your life is at risk, and as it is with others. That was a long time ago. This is a little bit more recent. This publication is The Sun. It's one of the most read newspapers in the UK. It's kind of a national institution, I think, in some ways. I do not read this paper, I should say at this point. But in 2013, they put this story on their website: legal drug teen ripped his scrotum off. Now, that's quite a remarkable side effect, I would say. I don't think there has ever been any scientific publication, scientific journal has reported side effects like that. I mean, it's complete nonsense. I mean, it was trying to generate these scare stories around legal highs, which were very much in the news around about 2013 and for the next few years until they introduced the Novel Psychoactive Substances Act. It's just a ridiculous story. And we still kind of see these types of stories coming out now. We see these stories around poppers and should they call, and other types of drugs that are very, very they're much safer than the legal drugs that we were quite happy with, apparently. It's still going on. The war on drugs is still going on today, though. Despite the fact that we are better informed, this is a really good example. The Philippines here is a very good place where we can look at where they've taken the war on drugs to a whole new level altogether. And Rodrigo Duterte, the president of the Philippines, really embarked upon this drug law or this kind of ethos, really, where he basically said to the population of the Philippines, if you know anybody who's taken drugs or is involved in the supply of drugs, you can kill them, and there will be no criminal sanction against you for killing them. So basically promoting these extrajudicial killings in the Philippines for people, and it didn't matter if somebody just had a little bit of cannabis on them or a little bit of drugs, it didn't matter. You were allowed to, he was encouraging people to go out and kill people to solve this problem. And this photo, which I find absolutely, really impactful on me, really profound. This is a mum holding her son, her dead son, who just been shot on the street. He was begging. You can see the sign in front of him there. He was begging, and he was killed. And his mum is holding him there. I mean, it's just the most inhumane and immoral approach to drugs, and it's against all human rights, and it's an absolute disgrace. And the depressing thing about Rodrigo Duterte is that I think probably until actually just a bit recently, his approval ratings were really high. They loved Duterte in the Philippines, and they loved this type of approach. It's an awful situation. And I want to talk about the UK a little bit. I should say I'm going to come on to some really good examples of how drug policy has been much better formulated in Europe. I'll come on to that in a moment. But I want to look back at the UK and what we've done. So obviously from the UK I know a little bit more about this. So if you look back 10 years, and believe it or not, in the last 10 years, we've actually had 4 prime ministers in the UK. We have a remarkable turnover at the moment. They're all Tories, I hasten to add. I should also say that by UK law, charitable law in the UK, charities are not supposed to have political opinions or political leanings. So all these things I'm about to say is my opinion, but you'll find, I think, if you speak to anybody else at drug science, they probably do agree with it. But David Cameron, he was our Prime Minister in 2012. He said, I don't support decriminalisation. We have a policy which is working in Britain. So no, it's not, David. It absolutely isn't working, and he's got that completely wrong. What's interesting about David Cameron is when he was a junior minister, before he became the leader of the Tory party, he was very much in favour of looking at, a new approach to drug policy. And he kind of suggested that, we can't just be criminalising everybody all the time. Unfortunately, when he became the Prime Minister, he completely dismissed that, and he continued this prohibition approach that we have now. His successor was the good old Theresa May. Now, she didn't last very long. She succumbed to the debacle of Brexit, sadly for her. But she basically continued along the same line. It is right, we continue to fight the war against drugs. Sorry, Theresa, no, it's not. In fact, before she became Prime Minister, she was our Home Secretary. She was the longest serving Home Secretary that we've ever had in the UK. I think she was there for something like 10 years. And during that time, despite the fact that drugs come under the control of our Home Office, rather than our Department of Health, which is ridiculous, but drugs were basically her remit. She failed to have any single discussion or any policy debate about drugs during her time as the Home Secretary. And really, it was no surprise that nothing changed when she became Prime Minister. Now, this man, I'm going to assume that you'll probably know who he is, because he's got quite a media profile. He certainly has in the UK, probably has around the world. He was our Prime Minister until something like 5 days ago, something like that. And there are many things I can say about Boris Johnson and the things that he's been up to in the very short period of time that he was our Prime Minister, but I'm not going to go into those. Thankfully, he no longer is the Prime Minister, is all I will say. But he said here, when he comes talking about drugs, we are going to look at new ways of penalising them, things that will actually interfere with their lives. So we will look at taking away passports and driving licence. Now, my God, this is taking it to a whole new level. This is targeting people who are using drugs in a very kind of non-harmful kind of way. It's trying to target the sort of middle class users who may be taking drugs in, at parties or after dinners or, when they go out to enjoy themselves. But in actually a very sensible and well-informed way. And he was trying to target them by saying that we're coming after you as well. And if we catch you, we will take away your passport. I mean, we will remove your right to kind of travel freely around the world because you're being caught in possession of drugs, drugs that we know, as Anna highlighted very well, very succinctly, that there are other legal drugs that are far more harmful that we are positively encouraged to use. This is an absolutely ridiculous approach that Johnson started. It hasn't become law. There's a consultation going on at the moment. We at Drug Science are doing all we can to challenge that and to say, this cannot happen, and we will see what happens. This lady is our new Prime Minister. This is Liz Truss. She came in on Monday or Tuesday, I think it was. We don't know exactly what she thinks. We can't find any kind of public record of things that she said about drugs really in the past. Who knows what she's going to say? She's a Tory still, so our hopes are not high. But we are going to try and engage as best as possible with her to hopefully make sure that she kind of sees where drug policy should be and the science that it should be based upon. So what does this all tell us? It tells us prohibition does not work. It's been tried. There's been a huge amount of money put behind it, a huge amount of money in trying to enforce it. It has not worked. All that's happened is drug use has continued, but the harms related to drug use have risen hugely as a direct result of prohibition. But it's not all bad. And now I'm going to tell you where it's actually been approached in a better way, and we can see already how there have been positive outcomes as a result. So just before I talk to you, I'm going to give you 3 examples of European drug policy that has been much better handled and is based on the science that we've been talking about. But before we do that, just to make sure we're clear on the same page here, it's useful to get this terminology right. You may or may not be aware of this already, but if we talk about criminalization, we're essentially saying this is if you use drugs or you supply drugs, you will be given, and your courts, you'll be given a criminal sanction, you'll be in the criminal justice system. So you're criminalized, essentially. That's what criminalization is. Conversely, decriminalization is not quite the opposite of that. What decriminalization means is if you are caught with drugs, instead of being given a criminal record and potentially ending up in jail, we will treat it as a health issue more than a criminal issue. So we're not really talking about supply, we're talking about drug use, particularly people who have problematic drug use. Rather than putting them through the criminal justice system, they're given care, treatment, support to overcome the reasons why they have these dependency issues, why they use drugs, give them a chance to get better, rather than making their lives worse by giving them a criminal record or putting them in jail or whatever that might be. So that's decriminalization. Kind of in the middle, on the other end is legalization, and that really, we don't really like to kind of use that term at Drug Science because legalization can mean a whole host of things. It's quite a broad range. On the far end of that, legalization could mean, complete access with no control whatsoever, a complete free market. Anybody can use drugs anywhere, whatever time of the day, however old they are. But obviously, we're not saying that is the right thing to do. I think within legalization, what we would like to see, and I'll talk about this in a few moments, is what we call regulation or state regulation, and that is something that we do have within alcohol, and actually in alcohol that's quite effective, where there's some very careful regulations about what you can use, when you can use it, where you can use it, how old you need to be, and that's really kind of like the best approach, and I'll talk a bit more about that in just a second. So as one of the first of 3 examples here, Switzerland. In Switzerland, they were one of the first countries to really understand that they needed to have a different approach to drugs and drug policy. And this was instigated really because, like in many other parts of Europe, they had a very high level of drug use, very concerning level of drug use, particularly heroin, certainly in places like Zurich. And as a result of that, they also had increasing levels of blood-borne virus transmission, so HIV, hepatitis C, really kind of very worryingly expanding very quickly. And that's why, in response to that, they started to change things. They introduced new treatment models as a direct result, and treatment models that many countries, including the UK today, have still failed to adopt. So heroin-assisted treatment is something that, there are a number of people who are addicted to heroin, and the normal types of opioid substitute therapies like methadone and buprenorphine don't work. And actually treating them with heroin and supporting them to titrate away from the sort of dangerous levels of heroin use has been a very effective method for a lot of people. They introduced needle exchange programs very quickly. Now, thankfully, most of the world now have needle exchange programs, but Switzerland were one of the first to do that, and very effectively, and reduce the spread of blood-borne viruses as a result. And really kind of the one with the most foresight was creating safe injecting rooms or drug consumption rooms. And this is about providing a safe space for people to use drugs, and particularly things like injecting, where they can do it very safely, and where there is very good medical support on hand if something goes wrong, if people start to overdose. And that's been a hugely successful policy. What we can see here, overdose deaths have decreased by 50%. HIV infections decreased by 2/3, new heroin users decreased by 80%. This was a remarkably successful drug policy that Switzerland introduced. In 2006, they formalized it. It was called the 4-pillar model. It really kind of embraced the whole kind of range: prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and law enforcement, because obviously, the supply of drugs needs to be enforced for sure. But it very effectively pulled all those things together. And it's internationally recognized as one of the best ways to kind of tackle drug policy in any country, really. This is Ruth Dreyfus, the Prime Minister of Switzerland at that time, and she really understood about the whole one of the big things of this is about making it easier for people who have drug dependency problems to be able to access mainstream health systems. It removed the fear, removed the stigma. It allowed people to come forward and said, I need help, and I don't have the fear of being criminalized by doing so. And that's why so many people then came forward and got the treatment that they really needed, rather than being kind of pushed to one side, or on the very margins of society, and kind of forgotten margins, and that's one. And she had that remarkable foresight to be able to do that. Portugal, you may well know about Portugal. Now, Portugal introduced a decriminalisation policy in 2001. As I talked about, it's about removing the criminalisation of drug users and treating them as a health issue instead. They did this because, kind of twofold really, partly because they had very high rising drug rates in Portugal at the time, in the late 90s. They also faced an economic crisis at that time, and that was really what kind of drove the need to change this policy. They realized that they couldn't afford to keep putting people in jail, and they couldn't afford all the fallout from this growing health crisis that was going on. So they decriminalized drugs, and then since then they now have the second lowest fatal overdose rates in Europe. So they've gone from pretty much the highest down to almost the lowest as a result. Blood-borne viruses have decreased dramatically. Drug-related crimes have significantly decreased, as has incarceration. There are many measures around why this policy has been so successful, and you'll often hear people talking about Portugal as the kind of like the beacon of hope, really, when it comes to drug policy. We wish other countries, other jurisdictions would really take notice of what's happened in Portugal. I wish it would happen in the UK and around the rest of the world, because then the world would look very different. I am very, very sure about that. This is Dr. João Galão. He was the architect of this policy, and he really, again, just like Ruth Dreyfus, had the foresight to see that, the impact that this could make. And this is an interesting quote, I think. It's very difficult to identify a causal link between decriminalisation by itself and the positive tendencies we've seen. It's a total package. The biggest effect has been to allow the stigma of drug addiction to fall, to let people speak clearly, and to pursue professional help without fear. It's exactly the same as what Ruth was saying. It's about removing the barriers so that people can come forward without that fear. They get the treatments that they need as a result. Just very lastly and quickly here, the Netherlands, and once again, we are all very aware of the way that the Netherlands introduced coffee shops, and this is a really interesting and very clever policy. So back in the 1970s, coffee shops started to appear where people were allowed to purchase and consume cannabis. In the 70s, it was basically tolerated. It wasn't legal. In fact, it's still not legal today. But in the 70s, it wasn't legal, but it was tolerated. People, the police decided they would turn a blind eye to it. In the 1990s, it was more regulated. So there are more regulations to make it a little bit safer. But the theory behind doing this was really to kind of separate people who use cannabis away from the illicit drug trade, and the only interest of the illicit drug trade is to get people to take more harmful drugs or more addictive drugs so they continue to use, continue to buy without any concern for their safety whatsoever. So in Holland, they decided to kind of separate those two. And they said, well, if we can make cannabis legal, and then people will have no need to go to the illicit drug trade to be out, and incur all the risks associated with that. Once again, great success as a result of this. Far fewer arrests as a result, because people were not being caught for cannabis possession. It didn't lead to greater drug use. Just as Anna said, just because something's made legal doesn't mean to say automatically people then go out and do it. That just doesn't make any sense at all. Young people, it's particularly young people who use cannabis, so they're not harmed by the criminalization, and their life chances are not ruined as a result of that. Really interestingly, and this is often something that gets talked about, if we did legalize or we did regulate drugs, the impact it would have on revenue generation. We could tax it, and this is what they do in Holland. They generate 400 million euros in revenue, which they then invest in treatment services for people who do have dependency problems, who do have addiction problems, and perhaps are addicted to other types of drugs as well as looking at prevention and harm reduction. So a hugely successful policy. So there are 3 countries here in Europe, very close to us right now, who are looking at things very, very differently from the rest of the world, having great success. And what we just need is for other countries to look at it more closely and understand it, and to start to think about how they can implement those types of policies themselves. So at Drug Science, just to kind of close up on this, this is what we think at Drug Science. We think there should be underpinning principles of any drug control legislation. We think it should cover all drugs. So by that I mean it's not just illegal drugs or currently illegal drugs. It should include alcohol and tobacco. Anna talked a lot about that. We should optimize health by reducing the harms of drugs rather than criminalization. We really, really must allow our researchers to be able to research drugs freely and easily. There are huge restrictions that make it really difficult to do research on drugs at the moment. And we must change that, because as we know, drugs like cannabis and psychedelics in particular have huge therapeutic potential to treat a whole range of illnesses and conditions that people are currently suffering with. We need to be able to research these to understand that better. The laws should be proportionate to the risks. As Anna mentioned, we have drugs like MDMA and psilocybin and LSD in Class A drugs in the UK, alongside heroin and cocaine, crack cocaine. There's no rational reason that they should be treated the same way at all. And lastly, respecting human rights. That's an absolute fundamental approach that we have to take, because at the moment the war on drugs does not do that at all. Just to finish up, we believe there are 5 systems of drug regulation here. So as I said at the start, it's not one or the other. It's not about criminalization or complete free market legalization. It's not those two things. There are nuances within that. So this kind of system, 1 to 5, is like from the very sort of loosely controlled to the heaviest controlled here. The first system would be unlicensed sales, which is really for any substance that really has no harmful concern at all. So caffeine, for instance, anybody can buy caffeine and anybody can drink a cup of coffee anytime they like, and that's absolutely right. The second is licenses for the consumption on premises, so like going to the pub or to the bar to drink alcohol. This is what they do in the Netherlands with cannabis, exactly the same. It has to be a licensed premises, so there's some degree of control there. Licenses for consumption off premises, so you can buy it and take it home with you. Again, like alcohol and tobacco, you can do that. You can take it home and buy it. And in the US and Canada, they're doing this now with cannabis, so you can go into a shop, you can buy it, and you can take it away with you. We start to get more tightly controlled as the drugs themselves have more of an impact one way or the other. So with drugs like cocaine or MDMA, for instance, we believe that specialist pharmacies could make these available, and these are higher risk products. So you would have trained staff who are able to kind of make an assessment about whether or not you should get that drug. But still, it's available. So, if it's determined that it's not going to cause you any problems, then you should be allowed it. And then the highest level of control, prescription only, where a medical professional would need to clinically assess you and decide if that is the right thing for you, very much from a therapeutic sense. So heroin-assisted treatment would come to that, but also medical cannabis, medical psychedelics as well. Sorry. So we think that is basically the blueprint for drug regulation. That's how it should be. It's not completely banning all drugs regardless. It is based on the science, it's based on the evidence that we have today. It would reduce the harms, it would make the world a much safer place as a result. And really kind of the key thing is that it's removed the black market now. I mean, the black market would be irrelevant. There would be no black market, maybe a tiny black market, but that's it. If you can access these drugs legally and safely, then the criminal gangs would no longer exist, and that's where all the harm is. So I'm just going to finish with this story, which kind of really brings it home to me. This is a guy called Robert. He lived in the UK. He lived in Kent, which is just right down the bottom, or I think it's called England's Garden or something like that. Right, it's on the south coast of England. In 2016, he wanted to purchase some cannabis. He went to his dealer, and his dealer offers him ecstasy as well. So he decides, okay, I'll have that. That sounds great, and I'm going to take it. But he died because it wasn't ecstasy; it was fentanyl. And as we know, fentanyl is a hugely powerful drug. And we see all too often fentanyl being mixed in with all types of drugs now. And, we don't know whether his dealer knew whether it was fentanyl or not. Who knows? Maybe he didn't even know. But the fact is, if it wasn't for the drug policy, if it wasn't for the criminalized gangs, if we didn't have the approach that we have right now, Robert would still be alive today. I'm very, very sure about it. And, he is one of many, many victims of this appalling and immoral approach that we take to drugs across the world and have done for many years. So thank you very much. There we go. Oops. That's me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Have a seat. Yes, over there, over here is also okay. More very interesting information. We are going to have questions and answer and discussion now. I would like to ask the people who want to ask a question to line up at the sides so that the people in the middle can see what's going on stage. So if you have a question, please line up on the left or the right side of the room, and people will hand you a microphone. We start on the left. Please state your name and please ask a short question so we have time for the answer.
Hello, my name is Klaus Rieger. I have one short question. I hear that the drug policies were at the beginning only coming from racism. Is this right?
I mean, not only from
or mostly from
mostly
from racism.
I mean, I think that's where it started. So that's very much what Robert Nixon was basing his war on drugs on. And if you look back previous to that, 50 years or so before Nixon, in fact, you'll see that drug control started to take shape because it was trying to target or demonize black people in particular. So yeah.
And I want to say towards that as well, if you're, at least in the UK media at the moment, there are quite a lot of stories going on about Aretha Franklin and the huge file that the DEA and the FBI actually had been keeping on her in relation to marijuana consumption and so on. And this was the case with Billie Holiday and a lot of the black stars at the time who were a bit too successful for the perception of society at that time. So there's loads of truth in that. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. No, question from the right.
Okay, so my question is on medical research. So when researching various drugs for medical use, how is it, if we are not talking about microdoses, how is it possible to do like blind control studies? For example, if I'm given some psychoactive substance, I guess I can tell quite easily if it's placebo or not. So how is it possible to counter the placebo effect in such kind of medical research?
So do you mean the psychedelics or cannabis? Psychedelics, yes. So obviously countries' regulations differ, and the US, for example, and Canada actually are making huge strides at the moment in various different approaches where psychedelics, especially psilocybin, can be studied. And I'm not sure about all European countries. I know, for example, Germany has started psilocybin research. The Netherlands are quite forward because of their, I guess, less strict drug regulations in general. And in the UK, we have to go through huge amounts of regulations and paperwork and huge costs as well associated with individual doses of the particular drug. So this all makes the research much more time consuming and much more costly than it actually should be. So we're very much hoping that this improves in the future.
Well, it's a good question. Addictive substances like psilocybin versus placebo. What do you choose for the placebo? It's a good question.
Yeah, so this is, if you're interested in it, so we are working together with Imperial College London, who's doing loads of research in that regard, and this is one of the key questions that we're answering or trying to answer at the moment, because of it's very difficult, especially for the psychedelics, as well as with cannabis, to be honest. I mean, one knows, if you've got an active substance, basically, but it is very difficult to find this out and to see what we use as placebo. And the results also show that participants or trial participants often are very, very disappointed if they received a placebo because they notice it. And but the downside of that is that then they don't want to discontinue the research, which of course it's their right to do, but it's quite challenging for researchers who are hoping to go through different iterations of the study.
Yeah, that's also nowadays when people get into a trial and get a placebo or a drug, they have to have all the information in advance. So you can't lie to your trial person. So it's a very difficult problem, but it's work in progress and we're looking forward to the results. Other question from the left.
Yes, I'm Tom. You answered the first question I had by saying that if all those less harmful drugs were to be legalized, the world would be a safer place. I was about to ask you if it was going to be a better place, a healthier place. You say yes, it would be a safer place. So if decisions were made based on data alone, they would be legalized and the world would be a safer place. Unfortunately, they're not made on data alone. I'm not sure if it's good or bad, depends on this topic. Would you have the same approach to other types of consumptions, for lack of a better word, such as prostitution or meat consumption, for example? People tend to say it would be safer if prostitution was legalized. The world would be better if people stopped eating meat. So would you have the same approach, even though, well, obviously your area of expertise is drug, but I guess you have an opinion on that too?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a great question, and not one I've been asked before. That's an interesting comparison to make. And so I guess the first thing I would say is, what we stand for at drug science is that scientific evidence should be the fundamental basis of any drug policy, and recognize that it perhaps can't be that alone. There has to be, there are other considerations that governments have to make when determining, how to control a certain thing, or the legislation that they're going to create. I totally get that. In the case of drugs, it's that it feels like the evidence is just completely ignored altogether, and the exact opposite has been done. So it's a really clear-cut case of where the evidence isn't being used. In cases like prostitution or meat consumption, those are two very different things. With prostitution, again, just like drugs, it's the harms, I think, probably come from the fact that it is criminalized, and therefore, if it wasn't criminal, say again, sorry. Right, exactly, and I imagine that the harms associated with the criminalization of prostitution are no longer there in Germany, and that is where we remove a lot of harm. There has to be the state-regulated approach, I think, to that, which sounds like in Germany probably is no. Okay, fine. Well, I don't know enough about it, but I guess the point here with drugs and prostitution, I guess, removing the criminality removes the criminals who are involved. Things like trafficking presumably would be helped, I imagine. I don't know enough about it. In terms of meat consumption, that's a different thing, because meat isn't. I don't think there's much of a black market for meat.
But I'm sure if you had it on our MCDA paragraph and so on, meat consumption probably would come very much on top because of the environmental impact, as well as health, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, so maybe we should.
Would you apply the same approach then? Ideally, you're promoting legalizing drugs. You could criminalize meat based on the same approach.
So you could do, yeah. I absolutely. Why don't you, basically? Well, so I don't want to give too much of an opinion on meat because I don't know really anything about it. But I would say that, as Anna said, we could assess the harms and the benefits of meat in a scientific way and use that to then, yeah.
Well, you could use the same scientific approach when it comes to meat. Yeah, good question. We go to the right again. Please introduce yourself and please a short question.
Thank you, Florian Eigner. At the end of your talk, you kind of had these different classes of drugs for which you propose different strategies. Now, there was alcohol and tobacco was pretty far up this list, and other drugs, which we learned are actually maybe not more harmful than that, were further down. So maybe you can say a little bit about your rationale behind this. Do you factor in some social factors such as, alcohol is part of society already, so we can't do anything about that anyway? Or what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, sure. Another great question. That kind of mode of regulation is not there to kind of try and compare drugs to alcohol as it currently is. I just kind of highlighted where alcohol currently sits. So I think hopefully one of the key takeaways is that alcohol is a harmful substance for whatever reason, and it needs to be carefully regulated. It is in many respects, but it could be more regulated. We could reduce the amount of advertising and marketing that is currently allowed.
Would you be for that?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. I think there should be more things like minimum unit pricing and policies that would help to reduce alcohol consumption. I'm not saying alcohol should be, is a bad drug at all. Used responsibly and in an informed way, it's very good. But we should remove, or rather, we should have those types of policies that would reduce the amount of consumption that's happening, because too many people drink alcohol, too many young people drink alcohol. Where I kind of highlighted examples of where illicit drugs could fit in with that. Those models of regulation, and I think that's actually that's taken a very cautious approach. So, for instance, the MDMA and powder cocaine only being available from licensed pharmacists is a very cautious way, and we should not, we should do it cautiously with tight controls, but allow people to be able to access those drugs. So, I guess it's kind of like the first kind of steps towards a much better regulated approach to drug supply than this complete ban which currently exists. I think. Have you got anything to add to that?
No, I fully agree, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We go to the left.
Hi. So I'm very thankful for all the scientific evaluations that both of you have shown. Just like to pick up on one or two statements that David made that didn't look as well supported or argued. Like when you say the war on drugs failed or the UK policy failed, and the only thing that you show are like some negative impacts, but you don't show the positive impacts on the side and the basis for comparison. So like if you say, okay, this didn't help drug consumption decrease, yes, but how much might it have increased without the policy? In other words, I wonder how seriously those policies have been scientifically evaluated, given that these are one-off experiments without a control. Has there been a serious attempt to estimate the counterfactual without the policy? Or is it just like, oh, of course it's a failure?
I mean, I can answer a little bit to that. So, yes, like you say, it's not a controlled experiment. We don't know. That's absolutely true. However, what we did see was other countries like Portugal, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, how they made it different and how this actually improved the situation.
Sure, sure. I've seen that. But of course, it's not a good comparison. I mean, it's not comparable to the US in the 70s, you see. There are so many factors that might differ.
Although the war on drugs was everywhere, it is in Europe too. It was Switzerland, it was Germany, it was Netherlands, slightly Portugal. The criminalization of drug users was everywhere, or is everywhere still. So I think we, yes, I fully agree. We don't have a causal scientific approach yet, and probably it wouldn't be ethical also to do that. You can have one country with this policy and the other with that. But I think we have seen quite clearly in some of the examples that David showed that it was a change away from the purely prohibitionist approach. We can improve the situations for users as well as for society.
Yes, we have a question from the right.
I apologize for standing on the easy side too. Yeah. I'm a folklorist by education, and I think nobody's going to be surprised if I say one of the most popular topics in European folk songs after love, of course, is alcohol. And tobacco is also very popular. And if you go to an open-air museum, you will see the artifacts of this ingrained culture. So we see all the production machinery for beer, for wine, the tobacco pipes, and so on. So both of these things are ingrained in a culture, and they're highly romanticized. So the good effects of alcohol and how happy people are to have alcohol and tobacco, to have a nicer life, are there. And we don't see this with the other drugs that are described, because there's no such thing as artisanal cocaine or like very pretty syringes or something like that. So do you think we can take away the romanticizing of like old folk culture? It's not going to go away. But if it were closer to us in our belief, so if we could look at the production side of, let's say, MDMA, and it would not be illegal, would it be easier for people to understand it's a part of culture?
Yes, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think this is quite a lot in your question actually, but if we think about alcohol, firstly, we know that alcohol has been treated differently to all other drugs, as we've been talking about for the last couple of hours, and partly for some reason that's been allowed to do so by the the alcohol industry, who obviously had the interest in selling more and more alcohol, so they've generated this kind of this impression that alcohol is great because it's legal and people should drink it and people have a great time, which they do, and culture has kind of gone from there, and European culture with alcohol is actually quite good, much better than it is in the UK, but I think the problem is with the other drugs, the opposite view is there, because everybody thinks that drugs are evil and bad and dangerous and shouldn't take them, and if you do take them, you're doing a bad thing. Whereas in fact, the harms associated with those drugs are not as harmful as people are led to believe, and so that culture hasn't been given a chance to kind of to grow, I suppose. I guess things like in the arts, the music industry, and places like that, there is those kind of that kind of cultural relevance, and you can see that coming through. But it's but I think the whole thing is kind of perverse because of the drug laws that we have, and alcohol has been viewed in one way and drugs in a very different way, and it's very difficult to kind of assess between them what that should be, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. It's a very interesting question. So, speaking about the Western society, but there, as you probably will know, wonderful artifacts, like really ancient one from more South American, Latin American countries, in relation to whether it's ayahuasca use, psilocybin, the cacti, and so beautiful paintings, beautiful stone carvings, and so on. So, there are other perspectives, I should say, on that as well.
Thank you. It was an interesting question. We have a question on the left side.
So I grew up in the US in the 90s, and we still had the whole say no to drugs thing. So police would regularly come to our school, and they would have this laminated board with all these colorful pills and things on them. And they would say, okay, this is heroin, this is bad, this is cocaine, this is bad. What are you going to say to drugs? No! And they toss candy at us. So now I can't look at Tootsie Rolls without thinking of heroin. But anyway, my question is, what is your position to what Antonio Maria Costa said in 2009 regarding that it was the money from illegal drugs that saved the world banks in the economic crisis?
Wow.
That is a question I don't know an answer to. I don't know it, so I don't want to make it. But I'm interested in your opinion. I mean, I genuinely don't know, but what do you think?
Well, I'm a complete lay person, but it was at one time, so he was the officer from the UN Office for Drugs and Crime, and he claimed that it was actually the fact that the government was laundering illegal money from organized crime that came from illegal drugs that did save the U.S. banks during the economic crisis. And I am not an economist, and I'm a religious studies person. But I came across that claim more often lately, that it's kind of people are talking about it again and again more often than they were at the time. So I was just curious about your opinion, because I really have no idea how realistic that is or not.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't want to make an assessment either, but I have to be honest, I don't know. But if you look at, for example, the Netflix series Snowfall, I don't know if many of you have seen it, and yes, of course, it's a Netflix series, and so, but and this is basically about the start of the crack epidemic in the US in the 80s, and the kind of relationships with various South American countries, and the involvement of the US government there, and it seems pretty far-fetched. I would say, but if only 1% of that is true, already it's pretty bad. And no smoke without fire. I'm sure there is some truth. And actually, when you do look, there is some documentation of the involvement of the US government in this. So yeah.
Well, I know in the Netherlands there's a lot of whitewashing of money going on from the drug dealers. They buy shops, they buy houses, and I live in Amsterdam. And I have to say, you recognize it. You see a shop, and there's nobody in the shop buying anything, but this shop doesn't shut down. So I actually we had a snack bar, and nobody was ever buying any snacks there, but it stayed open. So we definitely have businesses that are, just an address for an illegal organization, so they have an address, and there's whitewashing of money going on. But then this is difficult to, to investigate. You're getting in trouble as a journalist when you really investigate these things. But interesting question.
I realized that the point was that that's the reason why US doesn't want to decriminalize drugs, was for this financial reason.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess, I guess that one thing that highlights is how any government could benefit from removing the trade from the criminal hands and making it into a regulated government approach, and the money that could be generated, just like they have done in Holland with the cannabis trade. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question. Right.
What makes you so sure that in a legal but still regulated system there would be no black market? Because we see that in Frankfurt, for example, we have a huge black market for prescribed substitution products. We have a huge black market for tax-free cigarettes or lower tax cigarettes. So there are black markets in regulated markets still.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not suggesting that black markets would be reduced or eradicated completely. I might have kind of suggested that. I didn't mean to say that. It's reducing those black market interventions. You're right. There's a black market for alcohol for sure, despite the fact that it's pretty very well regulated and people know how they can get it safely. So it wouldn't eradicate it altogether, but it would reduce it. It would reduce the criminality that exists at the moment. It would certainly reduce all the harms associated with that criminality. I think we agree.
Yeah, but it's exactly like you said, it's a huge challenge to get it right and to get the kind of costing right, as well as we see with Canada and cannabis. There is still, unfortunately, a black market because it's been such a challenge in many ways to get the legal cannabis market adjusted to the price gap that the black market has. So.
Okay, thank you. We are going to the left.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but to the best of my knowledge, the current young generation, meaning Gen Z and the Zoomers, are actually the most sober generation in history. So they're consuming less tobacco, less alcohol, less drugs. Do you see any correlation to any drug policy, or do we see a change in social norms? And additionally to this, in Japan there has been recently a very much mocked policy because so few people, young people, started going to the pubs after the COVID lockdowns. And they're actually trying to get people to consume more alcohol. So I'd like to see if you have any insight on that.
So in relation to the first question, I think, social norms definitely have changed, as they always do, of course. And from kind of my readings, I have children, so I'm a little bit interested in that as well. And, if they want to be sober, that's fine. The unfortunate thing that seems to be a correlation, not saying causation, is the amount of social media and the time spent on the computer, spent on social networking rather in-person interaction, which people don't necessarily want to have a drink if they're interested in, or cigarettes or other drugs to consume if they're in front of the computer anyway. It's less social, but people meet on Facebook, people meet on there. That's kind of the social norms for, the much younger generation. So, and obviously that's kind of associated with some other issues in terms of addiction and gaming and other, other, I suppose, negative impacts that this may actually ultimately have on health and their social skills.
And just to say, I think, drug science, what we want is for people to be informed, and they can make an informed choice. So we want them to know the facts, and I think the social norms are starting to shift in that way, particularly with young people. They know better than our generation, my generation, and above around what different substances are and what they do, which is great. We want everybody, and particularly young people, to know what the facts are, and so they can make an informed choice. And we don't condone taking drugs at all at Drug Science. But we want people to understand, if they do, this is what will happen. These are the risks. You know that information. You can make a choice, and that choice might be not to go out and drink 10 pints on a Saturday night. It might be to do something differently because they have an understanding, and I think that's one of the key things at drug science. We're trying to present the information, not say you shouldn't drink alcohol, but you should go and take ecstasy. It's not about that. It's allowing people to make that choice themselves. I think young people in particular are really get that much better than older generations, definitely.
And then there's Japan. Japan tries to stimulate alcohol use in young people because the sales are going down. I also read that in the newspaper.
Yeah.
Have you read it?
No, but I think we are aware that fewer and fewer young people are wanting to consume alcohol.
Yeah, we should be happy with that. Okay, question from the right.
Yeah, so my question is, what basically drives people or governments to have this, let's say, increased incentive to start an all-out war against drug, for example? How does this situation happen in the Philippines where Duterte wants to say, yeah, just shoot the drug dealers? And is there any, let's say, global pattern on which this happens?
So the last bit is it?
Is there any global pattern which we can recognize what drives people to think, yeah, it's a good time now to pressure the politician to start a war against drugs? Is it just misinformation, or is there actually something behind it?
So I think the various different policies to approaching drugs has been motivated by a particular thing at any one time. So when we look back at Robert Nixon, before it was about black people and the anti-war faction. More recently, I would say there are other influences like the drink industry, for instance, the alcohol industry, who obviously their interest lies in people drinking alcohol, not taking drugs. They're not going to make any money if people start taking drugs. And they have a heavy influence on governments today. So especially in the UK, I think this is true. The drinks industry is very influential when it comes to drug policy. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons why there's just this reluctance for any of our successive governments over the years to make any change. Where we've seen that kind of positive drug policy change, like in Portugal and Switzerland, it's been motivated by very serious health concerns as well as economic crisis as well, and that's what it's taken for them to change. So there has to be something kind of significant that is going to make governments want to change that policy. I don't know if there's any one thing around the world that would kind of happen. One kind of major thing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you there. I mean, but looking kind of slightly on the, say, positive aspects, when we look at tobacco and smoking, which actually has decreased, here in the West, I should say, and as I showed, it's still a major killer, but here in the West it has decreased. And it seems as the European governments kind of almost together or in line, promoted the activities and restrictions to restrict smoking. You couldn't smoke indoors anymore, you couldn't do this. Even when I was a child, you could smoke on a plane or on a bus or something. So things changed, and together with the social norms that changed. So it has been possible to do that, and many less young people today in the West, again, are smoking. So, the social norms are also important always in the culture to consider. And somebody like Duterte. I think the climate in the Philippines, the extremely high crime rate that they had prior to him, they needed also a scapegoat, and there was a cultural environment that actually, this is the right thing. We need to kill the drug users. So it's always, drug use and users should never have been seen in isolation. There's always a huge social cultural complex that surrounds it, really.
Thank you. A question from the left.
So there's this concept of drug checking, so that in nightlife spots where there is a high probability that there will be people that bought drugs either on the internet or on the black market with a dealer, and there's a possibility that people go there, give a sample of their product that they purchased, and they will get an information on whether there's something nasty inside or whether it's just this substance that they want to consume. Is there any like science-based evidence on whether this has, how does this impact like negative effects on like people getting seriously ill or getting addicted to substances that they do not want to get addicted to? And yeah, are countries considering this? Because I cannot prevent people from using and purchasing drugs, because today it's so easy on the internet with cryptocurrencies and you do not even need to go on the street. So yeah.
Good question.
Yeah. So do you want to, or shall I? I mean, we work together actually with a wonderful lady called Professor Fiona Measham, who in the UK has a charity called The Loop, so do check it online, who's doing exactly that in the UK. And she's written several scientific peer-reviewed articles as well, exactly on this topic. So she does the drug checking. First it was always at festivals, and bear in mind that it's kind of not quite a legal activity to check the drugs. You know, so she jumps through whole issues and regulatory issues, but worked together with the police. I mean, she did really, really hard work all in her own free time. And she actually has now a static or drug checking facility in Bristol in the west of England, where this is possible at the weekends that people do bring that. And research is being done, kind of real-world evidence, real-world research is being done by her and the wider team to really estimate what's happening after. You know, often you can't say for sure, obviously, but there were plenty of cases, and this is published as well, where people had a drug analyzed. Usually it's related to MDMA or something purporting to be MDMA, and they were able to say, actually, this is such and such. Sometimes nothing like sugar or flour, but something quite poisonous, far more poisonous to MDMA. And there are plenty of instances where the person then has thrown the drug away after the testing.
Yeah, so exactly that, Anna. And this type of service, this drug checking service, is a remarkable approach, and for me it's as significant as the historical things like introducing needle exchanges and allowing drug consumption rooms. From a harm reduction point of view, drug checking services is just as significant as those. And we are starting to see them, as Anna, you're right. It's remarkable actually that in the UK, it's been happening in the UK with the Loop, despite the approach that we have with drugs in the UK. It's really hard. But and another thing that I think has been seen is that once again, it has not led to an increase of drug use. It doesn't mean that people suddenly think, hold on a sec, this means I can, or rather, people wake up, I've never tried drugs in my life, but I'm going to take drugs now because of this service or this intervention. It just doesn't happen. What it does do is make things a lot safer, and gives people that informed choice. They can decide what they're going to do with the information that they've got. So absolutely amazing, brilliant service. Absolutely.
Yeah. And just to say, and these are, especially preventable deaths. Most young people who take some ecstasy, they don't want to die. They want to have a good time. They're not addictive. They probably won't even become addicted to anything, but they want to take this, they want to try this, as young people do. And such a facility is vital because, as we know, drugs are unregulated. We don't know what's in there. Nobody really knows what's in there. So the risk that they have with that, unfortunately, that there's something really bad and really damaging in them, is very high. But for them to really know this, this is really, knowledge is power in that regard. And they're keen to have that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Question from the right.
Yes, because of non-uniformity of policies of the states in Europe, did you notice any tourism of drug users from a non-liberal country towards a liberal country? And why is it so difficult to uniform the policies in Europe, for example?
So I think your question was has there been an increase in drug tourism because of the disconnect between different drug policies in Europe? Has that led to drug tourism? So you might kind of think, right, okay, I see. And you might say people going to the Netherlands because of the laws around cannabis. So I don't know. I don't know from a statistical point of view around increased drug tourism, but I imagine that probably is the case. But in some ways, I guess if people want to travel to the Netherlands to consume cannabis, then that's a good thing, because in the Netherlands they are regulating cannabis really well, and there are, people are less at risk by doing that than staying in the UK and having to access cannabis from the black market, for instance. So and it's good for tourism. I don't really know. Do you know anything about?
The Netherlands is a classic example. Many of us probably would have traveled to Amsterdam also to explore their different approach to cannabis, especially. So, it absolutely does happen.
Well, I know that in the south of the Netherlands, they asked coffee shop clients to show their ID, because they only wanted to sell cannabis to Dutch people, and that gave a huge increase in illegal dealers, in town, who were selling cannabis illegally to French people who were there to buy cannabis. So. Whatever you do, it has an effect, and the most important thing is that you do not want to increase the size of the illegal market, because that is where criminal activities are problems. Okay, question from the left.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you for bringing the plight of the Global South to your presentation. I'm from Colombia, so I grew up in Medellin in the 1980s. Surrounded by car bombs, surrounded by crime, by mafia, by gangs. And anybody who doubts that the war on drugs has been a complete failure needs to go to Colombia and talk to the victims, to the hundreds of thousands of families of victims over there, and talk to their faces and say, like, no, yeah, well, we managed to reduce heroin consumption or cocaine consumption for a little bit. So in the global north, we are the ones that put the victims. The global north has fun at parties or whatever. But I just wanted to make that comment, because I like the person who suggested that the war on drugs might have had benefits is not here anymore, and I just wanted to talk about that. But my question is about PR, really. So Liz Truss used to be a Lib Dem. The Lib Dems are usually pro-drugs. What's the strategy there? What's the PR campaign? What's the lobbying that you're going to do for getting her on board with some of the policies that you advocate? Thank you.
Yeah, great question, and good knowledge around Liz Truss as well. She started her life as a Lib Dem, made the switch to the Tories for some reason. Who knows why she did that? But I guess the strategy in trying to engage with the government, regardless of whether it's Liz Truss or anybody who's prime minister or any government that we have. We, at Drug Science, we are there every step of the way, basically, with what governments are doing and how they're trying to do it. And we try to engage. We want them to listen to us. They do listen to us sometimes. So, for instance, Professor David Nutt, who's the founder of Drug Science, he recently attended a select committee advising on drug strategy. So they wanted to hear what he thought. So they do listen. But the difference between them listening and then doing something positive, there's a great big divide between those two things. We will just continue to try to kind of push for an evidence-based approach. Every single time there's a public consultation around drugs in any manner, we produce a very formal response to that with all the expertise that we have in drug science. We will continue to do that. I think what's an interesting thing that we find, so we do talk to many politicians, and they even come to us and ask us questions, and we give them the information. And if you speak to them individually, and it's kind of off the record, I suppose, they completely understand it, they get it, and they agree with us. And as an individual. But as soon as it becomes any kind of like party line, there's absolutely no way they will stand up in Parliament and say, well, some of them do actually, some of them are starting to do that now, but the party line doesn't change. And I think it kind of just highlights how, well, the absurdity of the law to begin with, but how perhaps it's been driven by the fear of losing votes if they kind of make these change. Because the voting majority in the UK, probably anywhere, is kind of older generations with a particular view on drugs, because they've heard this messaging for 50 years. And I think until politicians believe that it will become a vote winner to talk about decriminalisation or other things, they're not going to change. They understand it, but from a party political point of view, it's a different thing altogether. And that's what we're up against, I think, really.
Although I want to agree, but I want to add two things. So not all Tories are bad. So we work together, for example, with a wonderful person who is Crispin Blunt as well, who is very open and extremely supportive. He's part of some of our working groups in relation to medical cannabis and medical psychedelics. And so it's a good element, and we have quite a lot of politicians actually already on board. But sadly, they are in the minority. And the other thing that we are hoping also will move things forward, especially in the political sphere as well as in terms of public perception, which I think we need, moving towards the right thing with medical cannabis for certain, as the research develops, as there are thousands upon thousands of medical cannabis patients, public and politicians can see actually that these drugs can have a benefit and they're not, absolutely bad. And we, at the moment, as I mentioned, similar things are developing in relation to the medical use of psychedelic substances. So, if there, more research and hopefully, more development and also changes in perception.
Well, I'm always surprised that money is not a reason for them to change their minds, because the Swiss, with their very elegant research, they showed that every Swiss franc that went into harm reduction from heroin users gave 3 Swiss francs profit elsewhere in society. And we repeated that study in the Netherlands. So every euro that went into heroin-assisted treatments and other treatments, harm reduction, also gave 3 euros profit elsewhere in society. And America, the numbers are even higher. $1 that goes into harm reduction gives $8 profit elsewhere in society, like reduced prison use, reduced hospital visits, reduced hospital admissions, court costs, things like that. So if even money cannot convince politicians, I don't know what to do. Anyway, question on the right.
Okay, so New Zealand is planning to prohibit tobacco by continuously increasing the lower age limit for buying tobacco. So people born today will never be able to buy tobacco anymore. And in fact, over a lifetime, they are planning to completely ban tobacco. So what is your take on this policy? Is it something? Is it a good idea? What's your opinion? I think it's New Zealand, but I might be wrong on that.
I didn't quite catch everything. Could you just...
The total ban on tobacco, that is what you wanted to ask? What do you think about the total ban of tobacco?
Oh, okay, I see, yeah. Well, the thing about tobacco is there's no question that it's extremely harmful. And there are countries around the world, UK being one, who now have an aspiration to be smoke-free by a certain time. And I think the UK is something like 2030. It aims to be smoke-free. I think it's right that we increase the regulations and the restrictions around accessibility of tobacco as a result. And we've seen that with huge amounts of taxation being put onto tobacco products. All marketing has been banned almost in its entirety now. And not many years ago, you were allowed to advertise cigarettes. You can't do that now. And that has had a hugely positive effect on reducing the numbers of people who smoke. That's all good. I don't, personally, I don't like this kind of idea of just banning because, you know, I mean, that hasn't worked with drugs and it hasn't worked with anything else that we can think of. So just a kind of a blanket ban is not a good way to kind of approach these things. But being able to educate the society around it is a much better way of doing it. So I think the approach towards tobacco is right. It's working very well. We also need to look at alternatives as well, make sure people understand that. And, you know, there's lots of research that we need to do around vaping. But, I mean, there is evidence to show that, I know there's different types of vaping, but there's evidence to show that vaping is a much safer way to consume nicotine than smoking tobacco. This is all really good. This is the right way to do it, I think. Not just a blanket ban and kind of saying you can't do it because, you know, you shouldn't do it, and no kind of like discussion or understanding around that. You know, heavy restrictions if it's something like tobacco, heavy lots of education, and making that cultural change, I think.
Okay, last question from the left side.
My name is Amadeo Sharma. I have a question based on your comment that many people in the parties, they understand the situation, but they don't do anything because of the party line, because they're afraid of the voters. Mm-hmm. So my question related to that is, would it not be more effective, or should there be not more priority in changing public perception, mm-hmm. and trying to address the media and others much more, rather than directly the politicians, because that will make them change their minds when the facts are there.
Excellent question.
So you are 100% right on that, and thank you for saying those things, because I think that's exactly how we would see it. Perhaps I haven't had a chance to say that today, but yeah, you're right. The way to make change happen is by changing the hearts and minds and the understanding of the general public, so that they then persuade their constituent MPs to kind of pressure for that change, and then eventually, you know, that government policy will change. So you're right, public is the key, and media as well. Media have to stop reporting on drugs like they are, and do it in an informed way, I think. So 100% I agree with you, without a doubt. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's 4 o'clock, it's tea time. I want to thank both of the speakers for their excellent presentations and for